We always, Brianna and I always enjoy getting out and traveling around the state to do legislative updates after 4 months of hard work. Actually, a lot more than that, but of trying to get legislation through the process to give you all an update. And I know you all. I've heard from many of you all. Y'all are also missing your spring conference and other types of events, and hopefully we'll be back to normal soon, or whatever the new normal is going to be. But in the meantime, we do think it's important that the municipal clerks especially understand the laws that were enacted by the General Assembly this session, that some of them in effect now or will go into effect in the next couple of months on July 15th. This is a little different. So at the start, if you have questions or comments, Brianna and I'll try to watch. She's having some technical difficulties. Hopefully she makes it on here in the next little bit. Use the question and answer panel button at the bottom of your screen. If you have any questions as we go along, we'll try to answer it and keep the dialogue going to the extent that we're accustomed to with asking questions and trying to answer them. With that said, I'm going to try to share this PowerPoint and get it up and going. I hope I can do that. Somebody may let me know whether you can see this, the PowerPoint. All right, thanks, Bethany. All right, let's talk about the 2020 legislative session. We had several bills that made it through this session. I would put the League of Cities up against any other association with regard to the number of initiatives that we were able to secure passage of this session, especially in the circumstances related to the coronavirus, which made the end of the session, or the last few weeks of the legislative session, pretty odd. But we were able to get 10 of our initiatives that their board of directors said were priorities through the process. We'll talk about some of the things that didn't make it towards the end that kind of give shape to the 2021 session. The board also voted to support several other bills that weren't on the agenda, and 41% of those bills that were introduced that weren't necessarily agenda items also made it through the process. And that's a pretty good percentage rate for support passage. This session, and you all kept up with this, I know, we've been hitting 25, 26% over the past 3 or 4 years with bill passage rate. It was down to 13 this year, and whether a couple of factors at play on that. One, the coronavirus pandemic affected the legislative process, but there was a little different mindset this year with regard to not wanting to pass a lot of bills, and that was really apparent at the start of the session, that they were a little slower. They even changed some consent calendar rules over in the House because a bill made it through that nobody realized raised fees. I'll talk about that as well. So they were a little more deliberative in terms of passing a lot of legislation. So only 13% of the bills that were introduced actually made it. This year, the board voted to oppose 28 bills, and none of those made it through. Brianna was able to sharpen her killer skills and was able to stop all 28 of those bills that we opposed. And as we go through each of these pieces of legislation, keep in mind that the effective date on them is July 15th, unless it had an emergency clause or a delayed effective date, and we'll try to point those out as we go through the process. First bill we'll talk about is House Bill 44. I'm trying to get this on the other screen. You'd think I would have learned how to do all this by now, but I cannot. Brianna, can you watch the chat feature to see if any questions come through? You can see that? Okay. For whatever reason, I can't. I've got two screens here and I don't know how to do it. Did I just mess that up somehow?
Yeah, your PowerPoint has been removed.
Oh, great. All right, let's try this again. How about now? Are we back to it?
We just need to fuse.
Are we good now?
Yes.
All right. So House Bill 44 is the first piece of legislation that passed. Not really exciting, but we supported it. It adds a piece of legislation from a few years ago that we did about protecting our key infrastructure and other facilities from trespass through the use of drones. And the legislation is expanded this year to add natural gas pipelines, for those of you that have natural gas and other types of utilities, into that definition of key infrastructure assets, and creates a new crime of trespass that includes either physical entry or the use of drones to be able to take pictures or aerial shots and things of that nature. It expands the crime of criminal mischief in the first degree to include tampering with those assets in a manner that renders operations harmful or dangerous, and authorizes civil action against any person who knowingly directs or causes a person to tamper with, and also permits the recovery of punitive damages in those instances. And that was enacted at the behest of a lot of our utilities, and so we helped with that bill and supported it. House Bill 204, you'll remember from a couple of years ago, we didn't have any prohibitions in Kentucky law that prohibited a registered sex offender from entering public playground property. And this legislation tacks onto that bill from, I think, in the 2017 or 2018 session, that says if the public playground is leased, the registered sex offender cannot live or enter on the premises of the leased playground as well, in addition to those public playgrounds. And so one of the bills we supported that made it through. Next generation 911. Brianna, why don't you talk about your endeavors with securing the 911 funding with both this bill and 208?
Okay. House Bill 229. Am I echo? Okay. House Bill 229 replaces communication reimbursement of the CMRS fund to instead provide that the 2.5% allocation shall be used to establish and maintain statewide next 911 initiatives. It modernizes the definition of prepaid wireless.
Yeah. I don't know whether you reset the microphone or whatever, but you're cutting in and out and can't hear that.
Take it over.
All right. Sorry about that. And hopefully Brianna will be back so you don't have to listen to me the whole time. But the Next Generation 911 bill took legislation that we enacted, as you all know, in 2018 to do prepaid wireless and reset the board after Bevan reorganized it when he was governor. This legislation simply takes that allocation that right now says 2.5% of all the CMRS funds that are generated, they have to be used for reimbursing telecommunications providers for their participation in setting 911, so the AT&Ts and other types of providers of that nature. This changes that reimbursement program. It was kind of aged, and all this does now is to say that 2.5% allocation, which is currently a formula in statute, has to be used to help progress or move Kentucky forward to prepare for next generation 911 services, and eliminated those reimbursements for the telecommunications provider. It also modernized that quickly, in a 3-year period. The definition of prepaid wireless changed, and we needed to change the definition of what prepaid wireless meant. And that is broad enough now, and hopefully it'll capture any technology changes in the future to include any device or service that's paid for in advance, whether that is for the year, whether that's you buy the device with it on the card. But this definition should capture any type of prepaid wireless, and continues to ensure that if it is a prepaid, that each retail transaction, whether it's purchasing additional minutes, the actual disposable phone, or however those things work, they pay 93 cents with each retail transaction, and not just the initial purchase. I hate that Brianna's muted, because she led the effort on House Bill 208, which was quite a fight with their friends with TracFone, who are probably some of the dirtiest players in Frankfurt with the way they go about lobbying. But they have not paid. TracFone is a prepaid wireless provider. They have not paid into the CMRS funds. They make technical legal arguments all along the way. This had an emergency clause to it. And despite them hiring a bevy of lobbyists, we were able to get the legislation through. Our board made this an initiative because of their underpayment. Probably means $3 or $4 million a year in CMRS funds, but it requires all those that participate in that Lifeline program, not a fallen and I can't get up Lifeline program, but the Lifeline program that's commonly referred to as Obama phones, or the free federal government system. We had put in the legislation that we got enacted in 2018 that the providers had to pay. They brought suit. This clarified that even if you're a provider of Lifeline services, that you also have to pay the CMRS fee of 70 cents per month, in addition to all the other providers, because, as you all know, the CMRS fee collected on 911 is a user fee, and Lifeline users, whether they get the phone for free or not, they are users at the end of the day of the services. So that was a big bill. Hopefully, you'll see that translate into additional funds to support your 911 system. House Bill 362 by Philip Pratt creates a new broadband deployment fund, and this has become more important throughout Kentucky, as you're seeing students have to do their schoolwork through NTI, people working remotely. We are going to have to make some dedicated effort to expanding broadband in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. We have a lot of unserved and a lot of underserved areas when it comes to access of broadband. So we worked with Utility Association and several other interested parties on creating a new broadband deployment fund, and that's going to be within KIA. The initial draft of the legislation didn't make it clear that that they wouldn't use the revolving loan funds that a lot of you all are very familiar with to access water and wastewater funding. And we wanted to be sure this was a separate and different fund and account and didn't intermingle with water and wastewater. And we were able to do that and get that in the legislation. And it creates a new program to expand broadband services to those areas. It's a matching grant program, though. Grant applicants have to pay 50% of the project cost. It's for public and private providers. It doesn't include any grants that's received by the state or federal governments. And the projects have to most effectively provide broadband to the greatest number of underserved or unserved Kentuckians in terms of making the priority when those grants are awarded. Now, I don't understand what the 25 millibits per second and all of that upstream and downstream stuff is, but it's a measurement of whether or not there's adequacy in the service. It requires the KIA to develop guidelines, so we'll have to watch the Kentucky Infrastructure Authority in the development of their guidelines for their application as the program gets off and running. And again, I'll emphasize that it prohibits the commingling of funds with the funds used for water and wastewater services. Here's the glitch about this program. When coronavirus hit, you'll see that red note at the bottom. The legislature pivoted and only adopted a one-year budget. And when they did that, they were not able to include any appropriations. So we've got this nice program, this nice fund set up to expand broadband in Kentucky, and no funding to do so. So at least for the next year, I think what you'll see is setting up the infrastructure related to that, and then hopefully funding will become available at a later time. House Bill 375 was legislation related to the Kentucky Fire Commission. Those of you that kept up with the struggle we had with the previous gubernatorial administration understands that the liberal use of their executive orders to reorganize. And one of the things that the previous governor did was, in addition to the 911 board and other committees that city officials had representatives on, one of the other ones that got reorganized was the Kentucky Fire Commission. This makes clear that a mayor or other city officer, if you have a fire department organized under Chapter 75, has a seat at the table. The previous administration put a lot of individuals that had no interest or no real connection to fire service. And so this creates a new 14-member fire commission. It says that the governor appoints the mayoral or city officer. And we think that's important. It doesn't always have to be a mayor. So we included the word city officer to be able to have that seat on the fire commission. So clerks, that may not sound incredibly enticing, but the reason it's so important is, you all know, the fire commission sets the regulations and the rules related to training that directly impact the budget. The legislation also requires representatives to include females and racial minorities in there. It prohibits any more than 3 commission members for residing in the same congressional district. It ensures that firefighters are nominated by each association. That's the fire chiefs, the Kentucky Professional Firefighters Association, and others. And it requires the commission to meet 4 times a year instead of 6. And because of some difficulties they had, it allows less than a quorum to call a special meeting of the fire commission. And so that's a special piece of language there, to where 5 members of the 14 could call a special meeting. House Bill 378. And again, I'm not keeping up with the Q&A, so somebody let me know if somebody asks a question. Lien filings for city governments. This is the bill that I was talking about that slipped through last legislative session, the 2019 session. It raised your lien filing fees for code enforcement and other items like that on local government lien filings with the county clerk's office up to $46. and it made it through the process, and we knew we had to get that corrected. That went into effect on January 1. Unfortunately, there's not an emergency clause on this legislation, but Representative Thomas's bill reduces and creates a flat fee for any local government filing of $20. The legislation that made it through last year cost Louisville, city of Louisville, for example, over $1 million just in their code enforcement filings because it was raised to 46, and that had to be corrected. And so now any filings that you have to make with the county clerk's office will be a flat fee of $20. There's no addition for storage, no addition for other types of funds that are tacked on there. Just a flat fee of $20. House Bill 378. So that'll be corrected on July 15th. It seems like everything, every session has something to do with golf carts. If it's not golf carts, it's ATVs or other things like that using the state roads and city streets. Here is the operation of golf carts on city streets. There's gotten to be more and more comfort with that. And right now, if your city has an ordinance that permits the operation of golf carts on your city streets or other public roads, they have to operate between sunrise and sunset. You can't allow operation between sunset and sunrise, but on July 15th, the operation of the golf cart between sunset and sunrise, when it's dark outside, will be permitted unless, and we maintain home rule, which is really important, has a more stringent ordinance in place. So if your local government wants to allow nighttime operation of golf carts on your city streets, you're authorized to do that. If that's something you want to do, I would encourage you to go back and look at your ordinances in play that you have in place that govern that. Most of you have repeated the old state law in those ordinances that prohibit the operation between sunset and sunrise, or restricted only between sunrise and sunset. And if those ordinances are there, you're going to have to amend them if you want to take advantage of that. So I did see Q&A here. Does this include filing of easements? Bethany asked that. And yes, it should be $20 for any filing by the city. If you don't have a golf cart court ordinance, Lynn, you don't have to worry about this until you positively enact an ordinance. Unless we're dealing with the UPS provisions that allow the delivery of packages, and if you don't have an ordinance permitting your citizens to use and having designated the streets that are on that individuals are allowed to operate the golf carts. If you don't have that, no problem at all. That means you won't be affected. You don't have to do anything if you don't want golf carts. This would be those cities that want to authorize it. So you'll be unaffected by that. Brian says that they include ATV in their ordinances, and will that apply to ordinances as well? And no, this only applies to the golf cart provisions. None of the statutes addressing ATV use were amended during the legislative session this year. So I think I'm keeping up with those questions. Brianna, are you back at all?
I think so. I had a Zoom update. Is that better?
Oh yeah. Why don't you talk about marijuana?
Awesome. House Concurrent Resolution 5 is a resolution that requests the FDA, National Institute on Drug Abuse, and the DEA to expedite the research on safety and effectiveness of the use of marijuana for certain health purposes to assist Kentucky's policymakers in developing evidence-based, scientifically sound medical marijuana policies. They did pass this resolution, but did not pass the medical marijuana bill. Senate Bill 56 raises the minimum age for the sale and purchase of tobacco and vapor products from 18 to 21 years old, 21 years of age. House bill. I'll talk about this bill, Jade, if you want to look at that chat. House Bill 195 enacts the permanent language to authorize a city or city agency that is located within a county containing a population of 80,000 or more to elect to post the legal advertisements on a website. If the city elects to use this alternative, it must do a one-time newspaper advertisement informing the public of the alternative posting. The newspaper advertisement shall include or shall be no more than 6 column inches. It shall be published within 10 days of the website posting if it is to inform the public of a completed act, or within 3 days of the posting of the website posting if it is to inform the public of the right to take any action. It must include the subject matter of the posting. It also must include the telephone number, the mailing address, or the website, if applicable, where the city may be contacted so that the public may inspect or obtain copies of the full document. And you must provide the full URL of the notice website where the full advertisement can be directly viewed. The failure to advertise shall not void the action or negate enforceability of the matter that was posted. However, any violation or failure to publish the newspaper advertisement subjects the officer responsible to a civil fine of not less than $50, but no more than $500, along with the attorney fees. The contents of that alternative posting shall meet the requirements that would have been if the city had used a full newspaper publication. That alternative website shall occur within the time periods required by KRS Chapter 424. And the posting shall be maintained on the website until the deadline passes or the event occurs at least 90 days. If the
I was muted. I couldn't stop you.
Okay.
Before we go on, because I know there's going to be 1,000 questions about this from the clerks, to go back and talk about this 80,000 and emphasize why this is only 80,000. The legislation couldn't make it through. Of course, we tried to do a bill 195 in its original form, would have included all cities, all counties within its provisions. And it's an election year in Frankfort, and it became very clear that the legislation could not pass through even the local government committee, which we generally get most any bill that's filed, and in the local government committee through that committee. It would not pass. And so we had to apply the principle of do no harm. 2 years ago, the legislature enacted a bill that gave about 149 cities the ability to do this in Kentucky, and I think the 9 most populous Kentucky counties and all the cities located in those counties with 90,000 or more in population. And that was going to expire at the end of 2 years. So we ended up having a compromise so the legislation would pass to put the 80,000 in statute. And I've heard from a whole lot of people, clerks and mayors and others included, about why in the world KLC would end up agreeing to legislation that would only advantage some. And I think most of you all as clerks have been along this legislative journey with us for a while and understand that we can't throw a touchdown pass with every single play. If not, we wouldn't incrementally move the ball forward as we've done over the past few years. So I am, although discouraged, and we're all discouraged, the House actually passed it in the budget language that would have applied to everybody. That was amended in the Senate. It seems to run into an obstacle over on the Senate side with some in Senate leadership, with Senator McDaniel included, his district's taken care of in Kenton County. But I think President Stivers and President Pro Tem Givens and others seem to want this 80 or a higher population threshold for bigger newspapers. We think getting this enshrined in statute instead of it being temporary language will help us next year outside of an election year continue to press forward and get this applicable to every city in Kentucky to finally get it enshrined in statute. So I wanted to point that out as we go along. And you got to follow this process in order to be able to do it that Brianna's talking about. So a small advertisement along with the posting on your website. Keep going.
For proof of publication, the city is required to capture the posting and store it electronically or in paper format, and the clerk shall complete an affidavit for each posting stating the compliance. This would include the dates of the posting, the specific statutory requirements being satisfied by that posting, along with the URL. That evidence must be maintained for 3 years, and are you on the? Okay, that evidence must be maintained for 3 years. House Bill 351, which is effective currently because of the emergency declaration, requires that any matter required to be published under Chapter 424 must include the following statement: this advertisement was paid for by, insert the name of the governmental body, using taxpayer dollars in the amount of, and insert the amount of that was paid for by the advertisement. House Bill 195 also includes an additional provision that applies to all cities, providing that if a newspaper makes an error or otherwise fails to publish in time, that they are required to receive they were required to publish that the city can remedy the error by using an alternative website posting for those provisions. Do you see this affidavit here in the chat?
The affidavit, and in fact, at least at a glance, anonymous attendee, doesn't say who the attendee is. At a quick glance, it looks like it would be okay, but I want to take some more time to study it. I'll tell you as well, I've asked the legal department staff to prepare a sample affidavit that could be used. Sarai, I know you're in the background. If you can capture that question, and somebody let me know who that attendee was that asked that question so we can really study it and compare it. We will get the sample affidavit out to you all as well. I think the legal department, Morgan and her staff, have finished that up already to have that affidavit on file. The other thing that we were able to get, and Brianna mentioned the very last thing, was an additional provision, because we hear a lot of complaints where the newspaper has messed up and made some error or some fault with regard to getting the publication done. It delays the legislative process, and 195 would allow any city, if the newspaper has misprinted or did not print in time based on you all sending it through no fault of the cities at all, that you would be able to use this process, any city, to remedy that, to continue on with the legislative process. So if you have a newspaper that says, oh, I lost it, we'll have to run it next week, or we're not doing an edition this week, or we've misprinted it, you can remedy anything that's through no fault of the cities in terms of providing the information through using this process to advertise it on your website, even if you're not in one of those counties that have the 80,000 threshold. I don't know if there's any more. Doesn't look like there's any more questions. I'm surprised y'all don't have more questions about 195, but it'll move the ball forward. It'll remain a legislative priority for 2021 for us to make this applicable to all of Kentucky cities, and not just those under or in counties that contain a population of 80,000. Looks like we do have a question. Becca is going to be disappointed with your technical difficulties. Did you say that alternative publication only applies to cities of 80,000 or more? So Louisville and Lexington. It only applies, Becca, to those cities that are located in a county with a population of 80,000 or more. And so that would include, I believe, 10 Kentucky counties and the cities that are located in those counties, 10 or 11. That would include Jefferson County. So the 85 cities in Jefferson County would have the availability. Warren County, the cities in Warren County would, Madison County, Richmond and Berea would have that capability. Elizabethtown and Vine Grove and those in Hardin County. You have to look at the county's population based on the most recent or the 2010 decennial census about whether or not it applies or not. So it's about 150 something cities is what it's been expanded to. So it's not just Lexington and Louisville, but it's not any of them in Logan County, Becca. So you will not get to take advantage of it at this juncture anyway. Direct shipment of alcohol. This was a fairly controversial bill that passed in the session. The governor refused to sign it. It became law without his signature, but it creates the ability for manufacturers of alcohol, producers, to be able to directly ship alcohol into the state of Kentucky. They only have to, a shipper, if it's a distillery, I don't know why you would want to get bourbon from Texas or anything like that, but there are distilleries throughout the country, or a distillery even in Kentucky, or a microbrewery, or a winery. A lot of this was prompted by winery and wine aficionados who wanted to ship wine in from California and other things like that, but they've applied it to any type of producer, distilled spirits, wine, or malt beverages. If the producer could get a direct shipper license from the state, there's no corollary local license, only a direct shipper license from the state, and directly ship into the state of Kentucky, into a wet or moist territory. The license, if it's obtained, limits the monthly amount that can be shipped to any single consumer, depending on the type of alcohol. There's a staged process. You can do more wine than you can do distilled spirits. You can do more malt beverages, of course, than you can do distilled spirits. So that's analyzed on an individual consumer level. And the big key that our board wanted us to emphasize, and we got in the bill, was that the shipper would have to pay any applicable state taxes or local taxes that are currently have to be paid in Kentucky. So we're kind of breaching the three-tiered system here with alcohol. Generally, a producer has to give it to a distributor who has to deliver it to the retailer for the consumer to purchase. In this instance, the producer is able to directly ship it and engage in a retail sale, which made the distributors mad. They kind of cut out of the equation. But we say in this instance, generally you pay a local regulatory fee in the place where you make the purchase. In this instance, the shipper is going to have to pay a local alcohol regulatory fee in the jurisdiction if the jurisdiction where the recipient lives has an alcohol regulatory fee. So, for example, if a California winery is shipping alcohol to an individual that lives in Elizabethtown, the shipper is responsible for collecting and remittance of the alcohol regulatory fee to Elizabethtown. It's based on its destination. In order to facilitate that, we kind of have to treat this a little bit like the insurance premium tax process, where you have to file your insurance premium tax ordinance with the Department of Insurance. Likewise here, in order for all of these shippers or producers out of state, and even in state, if you have shipping come along, they're going to want a single source where they can easily tell whether or not the jurisdiction has an alcohol regulatory fee in place. This means you're going to have to report for the first time, in order to facilitate this revenue collection, what your ABC fee is, or your alcohol regulatory fee is, to the Kentucky ABC Commission. If you change it, you need to file it with them. It's ABC's responsibility, and it'll get fleshed out in the regulatory process, to be sure that those with shipper licenses know which jurisdiction has which fees. We did not, and we resisted this idea of having any centralized collection scheme for this, but this process will take off. We got to see what the regulations produce here, but we wanted to be sure locals were getting their regulatory fee. Senate Bill 99 also relates to alcohol. It seems like we have a cleanup bill every single session related to alcohol. The bill from Senator Schickel permits local option elections for microbreweries. We had this in effect for distilleries for several years. It was set to expire. And this bill also saves that. So now we can have local option elections for microbreweries in a drier, moist county or city. And we could also continue the law that I think had a 4-year or 2 or 3 year lifespan for local option elections for distilleries. If you'd have an election for microbreweries and the voters approve that, you get an NQ4, non-quota 4 license, and a non-quota retail malt beverage package license for the microbrewery if it's approved. And then, of course, a distillery. Right now, small farm wineries, if they're licensed at the state and local level, can't engage in any sales before 1 o'clock on Sundays in accordance with state law. This would amend that or remove that prohibition, which say that the small farm winery licensee could, in fact, have sales prior to 1 o'clock on Sundays. The legislation also permits the holder of a retail package license to hold an NQ3 retail drink license, and it permits persons under the age of 21 to be on premises where alcohol beverages are sold if that premises' primary business is live music or other entertainment in a public facility. So it removes that requirement as well. Brianna, you love ambulances, so talk about the
House Bill 8 just establishes a Medicaid ambulance service provider assessment to assist in the ground ambulance providers with a disproportionate number of transports billed for payment by the state Medicaid program. Once the notice of approval is received for the federal matching funds, the proceeds are to be used to increase those rates paid by a managed care organization for the emergency ambulance services and paid as supplemental payments to the ground ambulance service providers in a proportional amount according to the number of Medicaid ambulance transports. House Bill 351 also relates to ambulances. This will increase the permissible term for an ambulance service contract between a local government and a private provider from 1 year to 4 years. This also became effective on April 15th because there was an emergency clause included.
This is Representative, it says Rudy, it was on Representative Rudy's bill, but the champion for this provision was Representative Scott Lewis. Beth, I think you're on here from Owensboro, and maybe some folks are on from Beaver Dam, but Representative Lewis was the one we had to take it and attach it. You're going to see a couple of those things where we had to do some creative footwork to attach provisions in another bill once this Corona thing kind of took hold. And so we were able to get this into the revenue bill, but it was Representative Lewis who did it.
You want me to keep going?
Yeah.
House Bill 357 provides the reciprocity for any member of the U.S. military or any person in a contiguous state who is certified or licensed and in good standing under the National Registry and in their state as an emergency medical responder, an EMT, advanced EMT, or a paramedic at the same certification or licensure level in Kentucky. This language is a result of talking with many of our border, our cities that are on the borders of other states that are having trouble trying to find an applicant pool. And so this is one of the options to hopefully help with that.
House Bill 298 is legislation related to police pursuit policies that I'm sure your police chiefs have been talking about quite a bit. In Kentucky this summer, we ended up with, I think in 3 or 4 different jurisdictions, I know it was 4 fatalities involving various police departments in a matter of a 2-day period. Related to police pursuits of people that were not fatalities, of people that were not engaged in the actual pursuit. In this instance, Representative Tipton had a constituent who was killed as a result of a police pursuit as a bystander in another vehicle, and the family of the victim came and asked him to do legislation that would absolutely, completely, and entirely prohibit police pursuits, which is definitely something, if you talk to your police officers, is not acceptable, and it's probably generally not acceptable under any circumstance at all. And the idea in the original version of this legislation would have had the state dictate what a police pursuit policy had to say with great specificity. And that, again, is not acceptable. The legislature should not be in the business, I've said this 100 times, should not be in the business of dictating local law enforcement procedure or local procedures of any type. But what we were able to do with Representative Tipton was to actually be helpful in this. The board ended up liking it so much, we changed it to an initiative item as we worked through him with it. Our insurance and our loss control experts, law enforcement loss control experts, believe that every city ought to have a policy, and that officers ought to be informed about what that policy is as related to vehicular pursuits. There's a tremendous liability exposure with these after the Supreme Court, Kentucky Supreme Court, reversed course and removed immunity for police officers and others that are engaged in a police pursuit. Before, the standard was the accident or the harm caused was per se due to the negligence of the fleeing suspect. And that got changed this last summer. And so now cities are kind of out there and open from a loss perspective related to these types of lawsuits. So all this bill does is simply say every city has to have a policy on vehicular police pursuits. And at a minimum, here are the subject areas that the policy has to address. It doesn't tell you how to address them, but that you have to address these areas. You have to define what a pursuit is. You have to set out some decision-making criteria for the officer that will assist the officer in determining whether to start or terminate a pursuit. You also have to have a policy that says, here are your responsibilities during the pursuit. Here are your tactics. You have to provide for some coordination of communications and supervisory control if you have a supervisor available. If you listen to the officers, they have the adrenaline pumping when they're engaged in that pursuit with speeds up to 100 miles an hour, chasing somebody. If you have a supervisor who can, over the radio, provide information and make decisions, that needs to be part of the policy if it's available. And then it requires the establishment of a process for reporting and evaluation of each pursuit after it occurs. In order to ensure that every jurisdiction has a policy in place, every law enforcement jurisdiction, the agency has to obtain written confirmation from each officer that they've gotten a copy of the policy and they've received some level of instruction or training specific to the policy. What we found out as we've gone along here is a lot of your jurisdictions do have a policy, but it's never been taught to or provided to the officers within the department. In order to prove that that's been adopted, it has to be filed. It's not a review process. It just has to be filed with the Justice and Public Safety Cabinet. It has to be looked at annually. And if they're revised at any time, the updated policy has to be filed with the cabinet. As a lawyer, I was awfully obsessed with the fact that we needed a statement in the law that the law itself and the policy can't be interpreted or construed to mandate actions of individuals in particular situation. It's not preemptive for additional policy requirements, and very importantly, that the law itself can't be used as or interpreted to create a standard of conduct for purposes of assigning any civil liability. So that's it. That's the law enforcement. Most of your jurisdictions have these in place. Most of your police departments do. The KLC, KCO, Sheriff's Association, FOP, Department of Criminal Justice Training, there's a policy committee. The policy that they've created that most jurisdictions have comply with this law. So it's out there. They're not going to have to do anything from scratch. Most of your jurisdictions have adopted that, maybe with some particular local tweaks, but it should be an easy process. The other requirement is that we needed to ensure that officers were getting some training on vehicle operation. This is a loss leader with regard to the exposure of law enforcement officers and city governments themselves in these accidents. And so it's not additional training requirements, but it would require in the POPS process, the annual in-service training of 40 hours, at least every 2 years that they get 4 hours of in-service training related to this driving, related to vehicle pursuits. And then a new penalty, the Police Chiefs Association and others seem to think that penalties would help keep people from fleeing. We'll see whether that occurs or not, but beginning on July 1, the law requires a revocation of the license of any operator who's convicted of fleeing or evading in the second degree. So an additional penalty for those that do that. Now, Brianna is going to get to talk about our number one legislative priority, which finally made it across the finish line this session. She finally freed CERS. Your turn.
You want to answer that question really? Who is going to track the required hours of defensive driving, DOCJT or the cities?
The department. It'll have to be reported.
Okay, House Bill 484, as many of you are aware, we have been trying to free CERS for years. This bill is a result of a working group with the legislature that was established in 2018 to try to find a way to look at the administrative structure of the Kentucky retirement systems and find a fair and equitable way of moving forward for CERS. This bill establishes a county employees retirement system board of trustees with decision-making authority of the CERS trust. The KRS board of trustees will remain control of the KERS and SPRS, your state police retirement system and your Kentucky employee retirement systems. We are basically just removing our CERS members to create our own board. Both boards will work within one administrative structure, which will now be called the Kentucky Public Pensions Authority. The CERS Board of Trustees will consist of 3 elected CERS representatives. 2 of those will have a majority of time from the non-hazardous system, and 1 of those will have a majority of time from the hazardous system. 2 will be appointed members from a list provided by KLC. 2 will be appointed members from a list provided to the governor by KCO, and 2 will be appointed members from a list provided by the Kentucky School Boards Association. 1 of each of those will have to have retirement management experience, and the other individual would have to have investment experience. The KRS Board of Trustees will consist of 3 elected representatives. One of those would be from the State Police Retirement System, and 2 of those would be from the Kentucky Employees Retirement Systems. 6 of those would be appointed by the governor. The Kentucky Public Pensions Authority would consist of 4 KRS board members and 4 CERS board members, and they would review and make decisions for the administrative and personnel issues and expenses. Each board will handle the investment decisions, auditing, asset allocations, medical and other professional and technical services. The Kentucky Public Pensions Authority will provide benefit counseling and administration, information technology, the legal services, the employer reporting, and the completing and compiling of the financial data and reports, and they would also hire 1 actuary. This bill started out with CERS being able to hire their own actuary, as well as the KRS board, but that was part of the negotiation for the bill to receive final passage. We ended up deciding on 1 actuary and felt comfortable with that decision, since the joint board was a 50-50. And an even split from KRS and CERS. The governor is now, any governor is now prohibited from abolishing or reorganizing any board, and from that would be the KRS or CERS or KPPA board, and from replacing any of the board members. No municipality can file for bankruptcy if it is in default or delinquent in the payment of pension contributions. And that is it on the CERS bill. We're really excited for this bill to go into effect. The effective date of this bill will be April 1st of 2021 for the new board. And so right now we are beginning to work with the other groups, KCO and KSBA, on finding those board members. Some of you who are in CERS probably received a postcard in the mail that they are beginning to look for those elected members. And so if you haven't received it yet, you will likely receive it soon. Senate Bill 249. This bill is after many of you have been discussing with your legislators the cost increase and how it's impacting your cities, and so they heard you, which is great. This bill freezes the CERS employer contribution rates from July 1st, 2020 to July 30th of 2021 at the current rate of 24.06% for non-hazardous duty employees, and also 39.58% for hazardous duty employees, and it requires that these rates be used as the base for any future adjustments. We just reported, I think yesterday or the day before, that KRS acknowledges that those rates will remain the same. It also clarifies the use of the percent of payroll method for amortization and resets the amortization period beginning with the 2019 actuarial valuation for a period of 30 years. So there will be some savings seen with that on your contribution rates. Requires that an increase or decrease in the unfunded liability caused by any legislative changes, assumption changes, or gains or losses after the 2019 valuation be amortized over a closed 20-year period. This slide that JD passed, it shows the CERS non-hazardous employer contribution rates from 2020 to 2030. And so you'll see those rates changed with the rates changed enacted in Senate Bill 249 and what they would have been without it. And also the other slide shows the CERS hazardous employer contribution rates with the changes enacted in Senate Bill 249 and what they would have been without it. And so you will see that those are less than what they would have been. There you go, JD, 570.
Gotta unmute. I always forget to unmute. These 2 bills, you know, on the pension stuff, we bought a year, I think, with the freeze. So if you're working with your CFOs, or if you are the CFO and you're looking at predicting your contribution rates for the upcoming fiscal year, you see that it's going to be the exact same rate that it was this fiscal year in terms of the contribution. Look, 249 did a lot to lessen it by resetting the amortization period and requiring what we asked the board to do on January 12th, 2017, to phase in assumptions. 249 will require them to do that now, to spread that over a 20-year period. That is helpful. But if you couple it with 484 free CERS, I think there's going to be a better way to manage this going forward. Brandon, you forgot to mention your favorite story about requesting information from CERS in January. CERS is going to have its own board. It's going to be locally focused. It's going to have its own CEO. And one of the big issues that we've had as a league in communicating with you all and getting their actuarial information to determine rate predictions or other type of transparency, we can't get, because as you all know, that board of trustees right now and that staff have been solely focused on KERS, and we can't get that information. I think it'll help us make decisions going forward to have a CEO, a point person that's dedicated to CERS, a board that's dedicated to CERS, plus some understanding of setting these assumptions in a way that mirrors the reality in Kentucky cities. So hopefully that board, once that goes into effect in April, will take Senate Bill 249 to the next level as well, in terms of being able to return us to stability and predictability and affordability with regard to our contribution rates going forward for CERS. So that was a big deal. House Bill 570, Chairman Meredith sponsored that. As many of you all know, we had a work group of city and county governments along with the Pegasus Institute, Chairman Rudy, Chairman Meredith, and other legislators from time to time were working on a way to modernize local government revenue collection in Kentucky. And you saw we came really close to passing a constitutional amendment. In fact, we had more co-sponsors on the bill to do a constitutional amendment than we did what was required to pass the Kentucky House chamber. And unfortunately, as often occurs in Frankfort, politics got in the way, and the House Democrats, even those that had co-sponsored the bill, decided that they wanted to prove that their votes mattered. And so they decided to do pass vote. And so it failed to get the requisite number of votes to be able to pass the House floor, even with those co-sponsors taking a walk. That was a bigger issue than the underlying policy of allowing cities and counties to greater flexibility to modernize the system. We had pretty good indication that it was going to be looked upon relatively favorably in the Senate. Definitely no guaranteed chances of passage, but in that work group, we also identified the need to streamline and make easier the process to cooperate with one another. And House Bill 570 is a product of that. The Interlocal Cooperation Act has not been amended since 1962. A lot of archaic language in there, a lot of unnecessary bureaucracy with regard to doing interlocal agreements. So House Bill 570 cleans up that process quite a bit and modernizes it with the idea that we want to enable cities to cooperate with cities to cooperate with counties, but even beyond that, local government units to cooperate with state government agencies, local government being able to cooperate with other SPGEs and other types of entities. So it modernizes it, but it also expands the types of agencies that are permitted to act under the Interlocal Cooperation Act, to have these contracts and collaborative process or shared services along with it. It puts a prohibition. One of the things that a common theme that's coming up, not only from city officials, but county officials, is that once we create many of these things, these agencies, they kind of take on a life of their own, and some of them operate with complete disdain for the city or county that created them. This requires any agency that's created by a city or county, before they enter into an interlocal agreement on their own, to go back to their establishing city or county to get approval prior to entering into their interlocal agreement. The law was pretty sparse with regard to the powers and authorities if an interlocal agreement, and most interlocal agreements don't create a separate agency, but when they do, the law did not adequately address what the powers, roles, and responsibilities were, or what a local government could assign through the contractual process. And the law 570 will clarify what powers an interlocal agency could have, with this concept that the parent is still always the parent. The interlocal agreement can restrict, contract. The interlocal agreement controls, and therefore the cities or counties that have created the interlocal agreement control ultimately what an interlocal agency that's created through an interlocal agreement could do or not do. My favorite part of this bill is that it streamlines the filing requirements. To do first, my favorite part, which is remove the requirement for filing agreements with individual county clerks. Right now, if you do a interlocal agreement, before it can go into effect, you have to file it with the county clerk's office. And as most of you all know, KLC operates its insurance programs and other things through interlocal agreements. And we've ran into several county clerks who don't want to accept the filing, who make it difficult to get interlocal agreements filed. And taking the county clerks out of that process, I think, was a big move. In addition, we want to make it easier for you to add additional parties without having to go through an extensive process. This says if you're going to update the interlocal agreement, simply by adding or subtracting additional parties to the interlocal cooperation agreement, all you have to do, one of the establishing entities or the interlocal agencies, if you've created one, all they have to do is file that update with the Secretary of State's office. No notification to DLG, no notification to the Attorney General's office, to make that process easier. I'll give credit to the Attorney General's office. They were readily agreeable to take their approval process. If you're a city and have an interlocal agreement with the state agency, that goes to the Attorney General. If it's just local government units, it goes to DLG. The Attorney General's office said, we only need 30 days because the review process is only as to the form of the agreement. And DLG was a little more reluctant to do that, but nevertheless, they're going to have to do that now because 570 passed. And so a 60-day review process is going to a 30-day review process. And then we added additional language that said once this agreement's approved by the Department for Local Government, if it's between cities and cities or counties and cities, that once there is an approval, it cannot be challenged as to its validity of formation. Now, this is different than being able to substantively challenge the interlocal agreement if you're trying to agree to do something illegal. All DLG checks, keep in mind, is that you have a termination provision that it addresses certain subject areas. They just approve it as to form, that you validly formed it. The contract includes all the required provisions, not any weigh in on the substance of the agreement. But once that DLG approval occurs, there has to be some meaning to it. And the meaning would be that it cannot be challenged as to its validity of formation after DLG does an approval. The law remains the same, that if there's not an approval process, if they haven't approved it within the 30 days, it's deemed automatically approved by operation of the law. And then we did not want to end up in a situation where we modified and streamlined the whole Interlocal Cooperation Act and somebody come along and say, hey, these existing interlocal agreements are invalid now, so they have to re-execute them. So we put in non-codified language for the court to, or anybody else to prohibit this idea that everybody has to redo interlocal agreements that are already existing. Any agreement in existence right now is not invalidated. You may want to update them based on some of the new language, but you certainly don't have to in order to keep them operative. Senate Bill 5 is a piece of legislation that's been around for a long time, and it relates to this control of SPGEs. We got a Q&A. Amy asked, looking back at 195-424, just to clarify, it applies to cities within counties that have 80,000 or more. So that would apply to cities within Jefferson, Fayette, Kenton, Boone, Warren, Hardin, Davis, Campbell, Madison, and Bullitt. Yes, I think so. I don't know if Bullitt is 80,000 based on the 2010 census or not. It certainly probably will be at the 2020 census, but I think that is the complete list of counties, and any cities located in those counties would be able to apply 195. SPGEs, Senate Bill 5. All SPGEs besides air boards, Chapter 75 fire districts, and ambulance service district that impose taxes. Now, for cities, that is not very many that we have created that can impose taxes. I think there's some library provisions. There are some public health district provisions that counties participate in, but the list of taxing districts that cities create are pretty small. But if you have a SPGE that imposes taxes, it's going to be subject to Senate Bill 5. And in order for them to be able to impose a tax increase, the city or county has to approve that tax increase. And in most cases, this is going to be the county government. Now, when the bill was originally filed, it had a number of problems because it also said fees. And as you all know, back in 2013, when we dealt with this new creation of SPGEs, we wanted to be sure we weren't having tourism commissions, utility commissions, and other things run to the city every time they wanted to change a rental fee or something that was not already approved to come back before the city commission or city board of commissioners or city council for approval. So for fee purposes, it maintains that language, and that's what we asked Senator Alvarado to do on the bill 3 years ago when he had fixed this 3 years ago for us, to exempt all these types of fee increases from requiring the SPGE to come back to your legislative body. That includes rental fees. I think you're muted, Brianna. Are you talking to me? I think you're on mute.
I am on mute, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, rental fees established by contractual agreement, admission fees, fees to cover costs for connection, restoration, relocation, or discontinuation of utility services, penalties or interest, other types of sanctions for failure to pay, amounts charged to customers or contractual partners for non-essential services provided on a voluntary basis. Fees or charges governed by federal law that's not regulated by state law. Purchase water or sewage treatment adjustments made as a direct result of a rate increase by a wholesale water supplier or sewage treatment provider. Any new fee which the SPGE must obtain a prior approval from the PSC is exempted, or any other charges or fees imposed by an SPGE for the provision of any service that would be available on the open market. Fees or charges charged by municipal utilities for power, water, wastewater, natural gas, or telecommunication, unless it's otherwise required to be submitted to the city council or city legislative body. That list is pretty extensive. I cannot, in fact, when I read the list, I can't think of many things, just like right now, that your SPGE is going to have to come back for approval. This maintains the current law, providing that exemption, so you shouldn't see any change at all with requiring the approval process. We tried to get everything in there in 2013. I think we tweaked it some in 2014 in order to be able to do that. And adhering to this principle that we need to make clear that the parent is in charge, the creating entity. A city or county could be more stringent requirements. So if you want that tourism commission to report certain fees, you certainly could under this law. Or if you want to do more, the city or council, city council or the county government could require more fee reporting if it wanted to. So it adheres to that home rule principle. No Q&As so far, so we'll move on with Senate Bill 150. Senate Bill 150 is related to COVID response, COVID-19 response, and this is a temporary measure that addresses the state of emergency that's been declared by the governor. We'd asked the governor's office to do some things by executive order. They were reluctant to do that related to meetings, dealing with code enforcement. And so luckily the legislature was still in session, and Senator Alvarado and Representative Bart Rowland, who worked on this bill, included provisions that we asked to be included in the early part of the pandemic response. So again, this is a temporary measure that will last as long as the emergency is declared, that deals with the COVID response of the state healthcare providers, and it deals with state and local governments because we ask local governments to be included. This clarifies there was some question whether the governor's executive order could be enforced that permitted retailers to serve alcohol by the drink or packaged beverages at all by delivery. This clarifies that a license holder could serve alcoholic beverages in a covered sealed container by package, by delivery, or on a takeout basis if the beverage is being purchased in conjunction with a meal. So that clarifies that. One of the things early on we heard from you all, from those that sat in your clerk's chairs, is the difficulty with complying with open records requests, because you had rotating people in the office, and certainly if you shut off in government public in-person government services, and that allowing people to come in and inspect records kind of undermine the original intent. So at least for the duration of the emergency, instead of your 3-day response requirement, you have a 10-day response requirement for all open records requests. And the legislation also, and this has an emergency provision, so of course it's in effect right now, you do not have to permit on-site inspections during the state of emergency. And this again, regardless of whatever the governor does, this is now in state statute, and until the emergency is no longer in effect, you'll be able to deny those on-site inspections. We heard originally from a lot of cities about the difficulty in conducting meetings. And the Attorney General initially came out and helped and said, hey, don't worry about the provisions of the open meetings law that requires you to provide a physical location if you're conducting a video meeting. Still, we heard from so many cities that they didn't have the technological capability or the capacity, or quite simply that given the demographic of a lot of city officials, given the nature of being a city official, we have a lot of veterans, people who've been around for a while who weren't able to work the video conferencing equipment. So if you didn't have the capacity or capability, that you could use audio only. Now you can use audio only under the provisions of Senate Bill 150 if you don't have the technological capacity or availability to do video conferencing of your meetings during this emergency. So you can do by audio only. What you're seeing is a requirement that if you're going to do that and you're not going to provide it a meeting in person or a physical location for the public or media to attend, you're going to have to notice it up as a video or audio conference as if it is a special call meeting. Those provisions that you all are very familiar with, the 24-hour notice. The purpose of this provision was to ensure that if there's not a physical location to attend, you've adequately communicated the mechanism by which the public and the media could access the contents of the meeting, the audio or the video conference. And so if you're doing it this way and you haven't amended your regular meeting ordinance to be via video conference, every meeting, even if it's a regular meeting, has to come out with the agenda and the 24-hour notice and the posting as if it is a special meeting, providing that link or the mechanism, if you got closed circuit television or PEG access, how that meeting can be viewed or heard. The Attorney General helped us out a little more with an opinion after 150 was enacted, and provided that if it's a regular meeting, yes, you do have to do the special meeting notice provisions, but you don't have to stick to that requirement under the open meetings law of saying you can only discuss the items that are listed on the agenda. So if it's a regular meeting that you're conducting this way and you haven't amended your ordinance to your regular meeting ordinance to provide video conference, yes, you have to follow the process, the 24-hour posting. But if something comes up that's not on the agenda at a regular meeting, that it wouldn't violate the open meetings law. So that was good clarification provided by the Attorney General's office in an opinion after that was enacted. If you're conducting a hearing that requires testimonial evidence, that has to be done via video teleconference. It seems like we're getting a whole lot of questions right now about hearings related to the expenditure of your municipal road aid funds, or certain planning and zoning hearings, or you're going forward with your code enforcement hearing. Any hearing where you have to get testimonial evidence has to be conducted using the video teleconference. In addition, we ask, and they included provision that both suspends and tolls all the statutory deadlines that's applicable for planning and zoning and code enforcement hearings during the state of emergency at the discretion of the executive authority of the local government. So, for example, if you could not conduct that planning or zoning request hearing and because of the exhibits or the difficulty with doing that, the statutory deadline are told if your executive authority recognizes that you don't have to go forward. Under current law, if this had not been enacted, if you didn't enact within the 90 days, it would be deemed automatically approved. Most local governments, it seems, want to continue with any development that's able to go forward. They don't want to stifle that given the economy. And so that's helpful there to let the cities decide whether you want to take advantage of that. And then the last provision that we asked for based on the initial feedback when the crisis started was, and a lot of cities did it anyway, they extended their tax filing deadline on occupational taxes for reporting from April 15th to July 15th. And the statute doesn't permit that, even though we had a number of cities that did it. And so we just wanted to ensure that that even though it probably wasn't going to be challenged, that you did have the legal authority to extend those deadlines. And so we included that in the legislation. So Belinda asked if we have an in-person meeting closed to the public, should they be special meetings? And the answer to that is it depends. That's not always going to be the case, Belinda. In some cases, if it's a regular meeting that you're not providing a physical location to, you've used the special meeting notice provisions, but you don't have to adhere to the requirement that you follow only the items listed on the agenda if it's regular. You're noticing it up, you're treating it like a special meeting, regardless of whether it's regular or special. But if it's a regular meeting that you've done and you've continued to prohibit public attendance or traffic or media attendance, if it's a regular meeting, you can treat it as a regular meeting, even though you have noticed it with the 24-hour posting with the agenda, but you could deviate from the agenda on the special meeting. I hope that addresses your question. Beth asked from Owensboro, what if we need to hold a meeting solely for a closed session and the meeting is via teleconference? Now, the Press Association tried to fight us on this. You can hold closed meetings by way of video teleconferencing. And if you've purchased software or audio conference for that matter, if you've purchased that software, you have the audio conference line, you still have to adhere to the same rules about closed session. You've got to start out in an open session, so it's got to be noticed properly, Beth, under the 24-hour notice. You got to start in the open session. You got to have your motion. You got to state your reason for going into closed session. Cite your statutory provision for going into closed session. And what I've seen most cities do in this case that have done it is that there's another link that just those that are participating in the closed session, or an alternative phone number that they call if it's audio. If it's a Zoom conference, for example, they go to that alternative link, but they come back out into the open session, close that link down, go back into the open session and state whatever action, if they have to take action or that no action was taken, and adjourn in the open session. So in most cases, what we've seen is two links, one for the open session, one for the closed session, and it's used that way. And nobody else has the link, of course, for going into the closed session. If you're doing it by a PEG access channel, you turn the audio and video feed off during that period. But you can do a closed session via video teleconference. You still have to adhere to all the laws and the other legal requirements. I hope that answers your question. If not, I'll watch closely here this Q&A thing to address that. All right. If not, we'll come back to it as well. Brent, I've talked a whole lot. Why don't you talk about Kim Moser's bill?
House resolution, and this is just a resolution, 135 creates the Kentucky Emergency Preparedness Task Force under the LRC to assess the Kentucky's preparedness for statewide emergencies and to establish a plan of action for addressing these components and making sure that everyone's prepared, or if there is a need for improvement. It includes a requirement to work with the healthcare industry, businesses, and includes an examination of the state and local government responses. House Bill 271 is a continuation of a bill passed in a previous session. There was an increase of the line of duty death benefits for the spouses, but there was a remarriage penalty that would have removed the benefits if a spouse were to remarry. So this removes the remarriage penalty for a surviving spouse of a member of the Kentucky retirement systems. Currently, if the surviving spouse remarries, the monthly benefit is reduced from 75% of the member's monthly average pay to 25%. Senate Bill 229 amends the legacy pension plan statutes to permit applicable cities who have the legacy pension plans the ability to expedite the closure of their plans by permitting an agreement between the beneficiaries and the local governments to purchase annuities, only if there are fewer than 12 participants in the plan. This language is a result of a request from the city of Bowling Green. Likewise, if there are fewer than 6 active members from one department in the legacy plan, the Board of Trustees will be composed of the mayor, chief financial officer, 1 retired member elected by the members of a department with 6 or more members, and 1 mayoral appointed employee from a department with fewer than 6. I know many of these legacy pension plans do not have a lot of participants, and so I know the board makeup was becoming an issue for those cities. We were able to, in the House, add language and created a committee sub because we had a couple of bills in the Senate that were, just because of timing, they were not going to pass. And so we ended up adding 2 other pieces of legislation to this. One was our city elected official retirement bill that allows a mayor or a member of a city legislative body who is at least 62 years of age or older to retire from their career from a CERS employer without also being required to resign from their elected position. It also provides that the member shall not accrue any additional service credits for the elected position after his or her retirement date. We also added language to not count the rehired retired police officers employed as school resource officers against your city's maximum cap for the number of rehired officers that your city can employ without having to make the employer contributions on the retirement and the healthcare reimbursements. So that bill became a 3-for-1, and so hopefully those are some pieces of legislation on the retirement side that will benefit your city. Do you want me to do 351 or?
House Bill 351 is the so-called revenue bill. It does have an emergency. We didn't mention on 195, we had to get an override on the governor's veto on 351. We also had to work on a veto override from the governor. The governor struck the provisions of 351 that would have preserved the alternative publication, as he did 195. His first bill to ever veto, by the way, was this publications bill. And his first bill, we were successful at getting the legislature to override it. House Bill 351 addresses an issue related to leasehold interest and the taxation, property taxation applicable to that. I think the city of Taylor Mill had engaged in some lengthy litigation that went all the way up through the Court of Appeals, and ultimately discretionary review was denied by the Kentucky Supreme Court. They won, and of course the losers ended up running to the legislature and tried to get a statutory exemption for these leasehold interests, these retirement homes that people purchase or lease from the Masonic Lodge. It was a case involving the Masonic Lodge, to exempt them. This legislation, after all that negotiation, just says, look, cities and counties can exclude these leasehold interests for assessed leaseholds after January 121 if you want to. If you don't have to. Now, that legislation went into effect. The House tried to amend that legislation on the last day of the session. That ultimately fell over in the Senate. So this stands. It permits local governments to issue financing bonds for solar generated electricity. We still can't figure out where that came from. If that's your city, talking with somebody on getting that in, we really couldn't find out which city had advocated for that in the budget or revenue bill. This is one you're going to want to take note of. We flipped and we flopped, and I think the General Assembly has now decided to flip back to say admission to golf courses, even public golf courses, unless it's a fundraising event or held for a tax exempt entity or a governmental entity itself, that fundraising event, you do have to collect sales tax on the green fees or the use of the public golf courses. So we're back to taxing, even though we had that broad exemption in the 2019 session. 2020 session says, no, wait a minute, back to the 2018 status. Just for golf courses, you do have to collect and remit the sales tax. It also, you've heard a lot of media reports about the upcoming primary election. This is the bill that contains the language that allows the governor and the secretary of state to enact executive orders in tandem to change the time, place, and manner during a state of emergency in which elections are going to occur. And so coming up in that the June primary election, that's going to be applicable. We'll cover briefly the state budget. It maintains a one-year budget. It's the first time that we've seen the legislature do just a one-year budget, because so much was unanticipatable, I guess is the best word, related to what the budget was going to look like on revenue receipts for the state. The state's sales tax receipts are going to go down, income tax, unemployment as related to COVID. And so they just did a 1-year budget. And we already got information, if you hadn't seen, from the state budget director that anticipates more than a $500 million shortfall in this current fiscal year. And the governor has issued orders for all state agencies to cut spending for the remainder of the year an additional 12.5%. There's some discussion that the General Assembly will have to return for a special session to address the current budget year's requirement. At a minimum, we do know 2021, they're going to have to enact, with these higher hurdles in an odd session year, they would have to enact the budget for the second year of the biennium. It maintains paying the full ARC for KERS and SPRS. It provides that pension assistance for quasi-governmental entities that was so controversial under the last administration. It keeps those rates lower and affordable. Right now, for your health departments, I can assure you that that is a critical action on the part of the General Assembly. It appropriates some additional monies for them in addition to holding their pension increases the same to assist with those increases. Operation Unite got $1.5 million to serve those to continue to serve those 32 counties. It gives $300,000 and $1.9 million for the Poison Control Center, which is now operating, in addition to being the Poison Control Center, the COVID-19 hotline. It also allows access for the state for the purchase of PPE through an unbudgeted restricted fund rating, I guess, for those to cover PPE costs. Several of the school safety bill provisions were funded. We knew that with Senate Bill 1 last year that we worked on, that in order to be able to do that, the state was going to have to appropriate money. And if you look at that, they were fairly generous with $13 million for SROs, $7.4 million for the Center of School Safety, which we have a seat on, and $8.2 million in BOD funding for the facility upgrades. And then in addition, Senate Bill 8 further refined that legislation on school safety to require SROs to be armed with a firearm, regardless of, it's a preemption on local school district policy to say your SROs, if they're assigned to a school, would have to have a firearm. Right now, our attention has shifted away from Frankfurt for a little while to working with federal leaders on, I think that works, to work with federal leaders on revenue replacement for Kentucky cities. It looks like we're struggling a little bit. The Congress had done the CARES funding appropriation that would reimburse local governments for their COVID-related expenditures. That funding was only guaranteed for local units of government that had more than 500,000 in population, 500,000. So Louisville was the only unit of local government in Kentucky that was able to receive direct appropriations from the federal government to cover their COVID-related expenses. It's about $133 million that Louisville got. The rest of it was only permissive. The state could share with local governments to reimburse for COVID-related expenses, for qualifying expenses, if the state decided they wanted to do that. And we've been working along with KACO and the governor's office. And if you saw yesterday, the governor announced that he was going to permit cities and counties to access $300 million of our portion. It's less than half of what they could do. Right now, they're not committing to any more of that, but I think we'd be eligible for about $645 million statewide. So what should happen in the next few days that you're going to watch, we're supposed to work with the Department for Local Government. We're going to have $150 million for county governments and $150 million for city governments. It's going to be allocated out for reimbursement for COVID-related expenses. And hopefully that gets going pretty quickly. If you participated in the call with Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, we have the leader of the Senate, is the senior senator from Kentucky. He's been very accessible during this. He's drawn a little bit of a line in the sand about spending $3 trillion again, but we've been vigilant at explaining, and you all know this, rather than an expenditure problem for COVID-related expenses, our city governments are going to have a revenue problem by virtue of the government's response to the pandemic. And so we need some level of revenue replacement, whether that ultimately comes in an amendment to this CARES Act, where that additional $345 million is, or whether or not they do something with that to liberalize the CARES funding, or whether they pass some combination of a lower of a direct revenue replacement for all cities in Congress is going to be debated probably over the course of the next month pretty vigorously. The Democrats in the House introduced a $3 trillion package called the HEROES Act, which if you follow the formulas out, a lot of your jurisdictions would probably get 1.5 to 2 times what your annual entire budget is. That's not going to make it through. We might as well be realistic about that. But maybe some form of that in this negotiation. One thing that the leadership, Senate leadership in the U.S. Congress has made clear is that they want liability limitations for both businesses, and Senator McConnell now understands and is vocally supporting, if you watch him on Fox News and other stations, that city governments also have to be included in that. These are the classic non-insurable risk, the anticipated wave of lawsuits. The insurance industry worldwide believes that this will be the next asbestos run at litigation. We're going to have a whole lot of filings related to COVID exposures or business interruption and things of that nature. No insurance company's insuring those. You can't get reinsurance on the market to do it. So businesses are bare, but so are local governments as they go forward. So we need to get liability protections in there because that's going to be directly on you all and on your taxpayers to get that done. So we're working with him on that. That's going to be a controversial issue in Congress as they debate this out. But if you listen, that's something we need to get done both nationally and at the state level. If it really is like the next wave of asbestos litigation, it could be crippling for both businesses and our local governments as well with these lawsuits. So that's where we're focusing right now. You all will note in concluding this legislative session that the bill that you all had proposed, the publication bill, was a 1/4 victory, I think, in terms of getting that passed. So we'll have to continue working on that. And a lot of you were vocal about permanent amendments to the open meetings and open records provisions. We had a bill sponsor, a good bill sponsor, the House Judiciary Chairman, in fact, was prepared to go forward with it. It was done. We actually had the Press Association an agreement with it permanently extended the time, prohibiting out-of-state requests. A lot of those things that you all asked for embodied in a bill draft that did not see the light of day due to COVID. And so that'll come back up next year. I think Brianna is ensuring that the topic's going to be on some interim committee meetings as well. But we'll have to come back and take another swing at that along with the publications bill. So we do have about 10 minutes left, something we've never done on these webinars. If there's anybody who wants to make a comment, I figured out I have a tool on here, I think, we'll try it, that would allow me to unmute you if you wanted to have an opportunity to comment on anything at all. One question is coming up. Let me know if you want me to figure out how to unmute you so you can talk, and we'll try it. Christy Freeman is asking, where is the bill during this session in regards to the mayor and council having to have some minimum level of education? And this was a frustrating bill to finally get our board to support a piece of legislation that said, look, it's got to be provided at free of cost, so it's not an unfunded mandate. It will allow local government to determine whether they want to take action against somebody who doesn't do it. It was a good compromise bill after our board had rejected year after year after year these minimum requirements, and the Senate did not love the bill. They said, look, we don't require the President of the United States to get training. So a lot of the senators were opposed to it, and they ended up killing the bill at the end of the day. That's going to be a high hurdle in the Senate. I assume our board will keep it on the agenda, but it passed committee. We had some people that fundamentally misunderstood it that we had to correct and go back and correct. We even had a couple of mayors call their senators and say they were opposed to the bill. That was kind of the first time for us, Christy, to have some city officials come out. Once we talked to them, explained it, they called their senators back. But it was just, combine it with COVID and an educational requirement for senators and legislators about what it is. That's something we'll have to work on if it's still on the agenda, but it did not make it through the process. Where are we? Let's see, Becca Cox. Let's see if I can do this, Becca. And I have not done this before, and see whether you can talk. I'm going to try it. If you unmute your microphone, Becca, you might be able to ask your question. That's dangerous unmuting Becca, I think, but well, since you're not unmuting your microphone, I'll read what you've written. What about COVID-related loss of revenues due to the governor's executive order to utilities, especially related to this requirement that you not cut people off and you can't charge late fees? Is there anything proposed in state or federal funding to recoup those losses? Let's face it, there are certain not so upstanding citizens that will pick up and move as soon as this is over and leave our cities with substantial bills. And that is a major requirement in this revenue bill we're talking about with Congress. Frankly, the state's not going to have any money. The state's not going to be able to replace revenue for local governments. This is going to have to come from Washington. That's something we talked with Senator McConnell about as well. But you're right, there's going to be a big portion of non-recovery on these cutoffs, and we're going to have to get that included as an approved use, either with CARES funding or a fourth stimulus package from Washington. And that's why we've kind of turned our attention to that issue. But you're completely correct, Becca. And we will try to get that done through Washington. Is there anybody else that would like for me to try to have your phone unmuted or try that with? Since Becca wasn't able to do that has a comment or a question they would like to ask.
I just want to let everyone know that the legislative update publication will be released on our social media tomorrow and will also be included in the city limit legislative bulletin.
Well, if there are no additional questions, we actually made it 5 minutes under. Those of you who've been around a while realize that may be a first for me to finish early on a legislative update. I think Again, I'm sorry it has to be via webinar. The league will make decisions in June about our annual conference in September. That's something that we're considering doing, and whether or not we're going to be able to have that or not, we're working on, and hopefully we'll have an answer sometime in June about what the league is going to do. We are slowly returning back to work. At the league, I authorized in-state travel for our staff. I'd prohibited that for a while. So as long as the city that they're traveling to is able to comply with their policies, no gatherings of more than 10 or more people and things of that nature, you should see your loss control representatives and others. There is a requirement that they contact your city prior to seeing any KLC staffer just show up at your door to make sure there's a comfort level. You all have been operating. I think we've had a luxury at the league that most of your employees do not have, which has been able to work remotely and put these requirements on. But hopefully you'll see the league kind of process back to normal. Lori, I think I successfully unmuted you and you can talk.
Okay, we'll see if you guys can hear me. Great. On that section 6 there where he tells us that it can only be electric, water, wastewater, and natural gas. It does not state garbage. Could that be a possible loophole to cut these deadbeats off, just to be blunt about it?
If you're looking at the governor's executive order, I think you're gonna end up probably, and even though the executive order had not applied, it only applied to investor-owned or PSC regulated utilities. Most cities were voluntarily not doing cutoffs because we didn't want to be put under PSC jurisdiction at all. And as you heard his explanation, in order to be healthy at home, you have to be able to have access to these services. Yeah, you may have found a technical reason to do it. I think the way that Governor Beshear is reacting to that, though, if it trickles back up to the governor's office, you can see an executive order being issued probably that would prohibit the cutoff for non-payment of garbage if you did try to use that loophole at all. So yeah, technically you might be reading that correctly, but I think as a practical matter, you'll see a gubernatorial response pretty quickly, especially if that deadbeat you're talking about ends up calling the governor's office.
Right. Yeah, we have a few village idiots that's pushing the button here. They're already using on their 4th bill.
Let's see if I can unmute Camilla. How you say your name? I'm gonna try to do that. If you unmute your line, you might be able to ask a question about your question. If not, I'll read it, and so somebody will have to type the answer. What about the clerks training in July? I don't know whether Cassie or somebody can type an answer to that. That right now is set to go. And the decision, Kathy says, will be made on June 1st as well. It looks like there'll be a lot of decisions about these conferences made at some point in June. So the decision, Kathy said, will be made on June 1st regarding the clerks training in July. And I assume the clerks Masters Academy in August will come later. All right. Well, it's time to conclude our presentation. And if you need anything from the league, the legal department's ready. All of us are ready. We really miss you all and seeing you all. And hopefully we can do more of these webinars. We've gotten better at doing that, I hope, as we've gone along. And any questions you need, answered by us, don't hesitate to call. We're here for you all, and good luck with your respective reopenings in your communities as you start moving in that direction a little bit. And if you have any questions about that, let us know about those things. If not, that concludes this session, and we will cut it off. And y'all have a good rest of the day. It looks like I know Brianna's face when she's wanting to talk. So
I just want to thank all of you for being so engaged. Our success is because of you, and you letting us know what's going on in your city and how issues are impacting you on a daily basis and bringing issues to us. And so we really appreciate you, because we couldn't do it without you. So thank you, guys.
have a good one.